very mixed feelings about the Twilight score. On one hand you have Bella's theme, and on the other hand you have... But today we're just going to be talking about Bella's Lullaby. This is a short cue that plays when Edward carries Bella on his back, and then the scene changes to him playing the piano part of the cue. This is a rare instance in a film where the music is considered semi-diegetic, which is a Berkeley film scoring way of saying the music exists in-universe, with the character physically playing the piano part, but also partially in the fourth wall, so to speak, with all of the other instruments in the cue only heard by the audience, rather than the characters in the movie. But more importantly, this means my Berkeley degree is finally useful for a second time in my life. Nice. Okay, but jokes aside, this plays into the analysis since the real-world composer, Carter Burwell, presumably wrote this cue as if it was written by the character of Edward Cullen. We'll talk about that more in a second, but let's actually take a look at the cue. I've transcribed the tune as a piano reduction, and while mostly accurate, I've reduced some of the inner ostinatos and harmony lines to make them more playable, easier to read, and easier to analyze. Essentially, it's 99% accurate unless you're a violist. Sorry, violists. But anyways, let's listen to that first part. The cue starts in what sounds like D major, which alternates between G minor or 4 minor. Due to the presence of the scale degree flat 6, in this case B flat, 4 minor is a classic heartstring pulling chord that is perfect for a love theme. At least that's what I would say, but this has been taken advantage of by so many composers and songwriters in the past 500 years that it's almost an unspoken cliche at best, and a faux pas at worst, if not used sparingly and tastefully. But Mr. Burwell doesn't care about the opinions of lesser composers, and just barrels straight into that 4 minor multiple times, literally as soon as he establishes the tonality. It sounds like I'm being sarcastic, but it actually kind of works. In the context of the movie, which at face value is really just the classic tale of bad boy meets a not like the other girls type girl, this harmony choice feels fitting and self-aware, which normally wouldn't be enough for me to give it a pass, but look at what comes next. That 1 to 4 minor vamp builds until we land on the relatively unexpected C major with a sharp 11 or flat 7. We previously haven't heard the 7th scale degree until now, which unexpectedly appears here as a C natural, contrasting with what would normally be diatonic to D major or C sharp. This means our scale solidly sounds more like Mixolydian flat 6 instead of what we previously assumed, harmonic major. The jargon isn't too important, but this is a very weighty and modal key center that is functionally a minor scale but with a major third. What this accomplishes is giving us the warm major tonic while being able to take advantage of the minor flavors, such as the 4 minor and flat 7. The next chord after our C major sharp 11 is the B flat major 7 sharp 11. This doesn't introduce any new colors, but follows the bass movement down an additional whole step from that C major, and then voice leads us down a half step to an open 5th voiced A minor 9. Two important but subtle things happened here. The B flat major 7 that resolved down to the A minor feels kind of like a Phrygian half-step resolution from flat 2 major 7 to 1 minor. The previously unheard B natural, the 9 on our A minor, rips us out of our D mixotonality and modulates us into A minor. But what this also accomplishes is establishing the interplay between that B flat and B natural. Keep both of those ideas in mind since they'll come up again in a minute. Let's listen to the next part.
I don't even know what you're saying. What are you talking
Same,
about?
Bella. Same. Now that we got past the intro, we're now onto the meat and potatoes of the cue. This little piano ditty is the main motif of the tune. On paper, it looks kind of bad. And I don't mean bad, I mean garbage. And honestly, even hearing it in context, it sounds kinda garbage. When I first heard it, it completely took me out of the movie, and not necessarily in a good way. But it did intrigue me, so I listened to it some more. And after listening to it enough times to transcribe the entire cue, it's actually a great motif. So definitely the weirdest thing about the motif is the jarringly non-diatonic first note. That B flat is superimposed over our A minor, which is unexpected, especially considering we have a B natural in the voicing. Listen to what this vertical slice sounds like. It's weird and kind of dissonant, right? Especially considering it's technically a love theme. The motif descends down from that B flat before hitting the B natural an octave below, into the resolution to A. I've thought about what would compel Burwell to choose that flat 9 as our first note of the motif, especially considering he ends up using the B natural only a few notes later. And after really thinking about it, I think the answer lies in grunge. So hear me out. This motif sounds like grunge. That bitter B flat on top, and the last time we hear B flat, that B flat major 7 chord, resolved down to the respective A's, almost implying a kind of darker Phrygian sound. These melodies feel evocative of something like Nirvana, specifically in the way they flip-flop between major and minor scale degrees in tunes like Lithium. Listen to an example of this kind of interplay in Nirvana's Lounge Act. In our key of B flat, that penultimate chord in the chord progression is the half-step resolving flat 2, borrowed from Phrygian. At least for me, harmonically, this sound is what I think of when I think of grunge, and this is what I hear in Bella's theme. This kind of influence would make sense, considering Carter Burwell played in punk rock bands in his youth, and especially considering the rest of the soundtrack has that grungy alt-rock flair. This seems like a deliberate decision and inspiration. But I'll stop connecting different genres of alt-rock before someone who actually cares about this sort of thing finds out where I live and executes me. However, Carter Burwell aside, this grunge theory goes even deeper. Twilight takes place in Forks, Washington. Where was grunge born? Seattle, Washington. Remember when I said Edward wrote the tune for Bella? Since he's well over 100 years old, he would have been very alive during the rise of grunge, and since he's an edgy and anti-establishment eternal 17-year-old, you just know he thought Nirvana was the coolest thing ever. But anyways, that's the end of my That's Just a Theory, a music theory segment. Back to regular harmonic analysis. Under the melody, notice we don't have a third in the voicing. As mentioned previously, the harmony underneath is stacked in fifths, with the top B going down to A. That fifth stacking, I just realized, also seems evocative of grunge power chords, but maybe that's a bit of a stretch. The third scale degree, C, doesn't appear in the melody either. I think this was a tasteful choice, since the omission of the third, combined with the interplay between the B flat and B, makes this section feel kind of tonally ambiguous. This tonal ambiguity does play a role in a few measures, but I think as a sound in itself, it feels cold, matching both the cold and depressingly blue color grading of the Pacific Northwest, along with Edward, who is physically cold to the touch. But I guess that's what happens when you date someone who lives in Washington. I hope I never do that. Let's see what happens next. We finally get our third in the form of C major, which is a relatively expected and diatonic sound, before going back to the A minor 9 again. The motif repeats, but something cool happens afterwards. We have this ascending line in the melody that hits these little chromatic approaches. This F sharp is important in that it establishes our sixth for the first time in A minor. What this accomplishes is flavoring our A minor as the Dorian mode. Contrasting with our previous, darker, more Phrygian-ish section a few measures ago, the melody takes us to a brighter color, but it also accomplishes something else. We modulate into a G major tonality in the next measure. Something neat is that G major is the parent key of A Dorian, meaning they share the same accidentals despite having different key centers. What this means is that it's incredibly easy to modulate from the more unstable sound of A Dorian to G major, not necessarily needing to establish tonal context. Something else that's cool is that in the beginning of the tune, we're in D Mixolydian flat 6. Since that flat 6, the B flat, flip-flops so often with the B natural, this section can be considered D Mixolydian, which also has a parent key of G major. Carter Burwell successfully takes us to 3 different key centers without changing any accidentals, and not only is that reasonably difficult, it's also very uncommon. It's a very big brain move though, in that it establishes a very film scory modality for the first few sections, before settling into a more stable major tonality, perhaps paralleling the tentativeness Edward feels in their relationship before both of them begin to open up to each other. Unexpected though is a return to our original motif after the nice little G major section. It's especially jarring coming out of major into this non-diatonic stuff, and the melody is doubled in the woodwinds as if to emphasize that. This 8-note motif is further developed, as the next figure repeats the same rhythm, but moves up in a resolution to E minor, the relative minor of G major. I especially like how the melody jumps in tritones twice. It's a relatively uncommon sound that has the potential to sound kind of bad, but it kind of works here. Let's hear what comes next. The next section goes into the very tonal G major type sound again. Nothing too interesting we haven't already talked about, but I kind of like what happens here. The strings play this figure twice, hitting B on the downbeat of these 3 measures. On the 3rd measure, however, it hits the sharp 11 over the F major chord, which, combined with the flat 7 sound, and the first time we've heard that F natural in the tune, creates a sense of intrigue. Like previously, this melodic figure and the following 4 measures are a development of and a callback to our original 8-note motif, transforming it from that tentative and darker modal sound to a calmer and more tender flavor, paralleling the development of Edward and Bella's relationship. The following section is mostly the same as the previous one, so not much to analyze, but the ending is interesting. Let's listen. We end the cue on an open 5th E power chord, with no 3rd or funny little tensions. Ending on the relative minor technically, it's an interesting choice, perhaps highlighting the incongruous nature of Edward and Bella's relationship and foreshadowing the events that happen later in the movie due to that incongruity. And that open 5th voicing only further adds to that foreboding quality the ending has. And that's really all there is to say about the tune. Honestly, I'm surprised I even made a Twilight video. To be honest, I didn't really like the rest of the score, so when this cue started playing, it caught me off guard. I do have to give Carter Burwell credit though, for trying something interesting and different for his score that he could have easily painted by the numbers. All in all, my thoughts are...
That was a very dangerous maneuver.